Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. In this video, I wanted to talk to you about the direction in which human civilization is going in, which I think is actually going to lead to our own annihilation, to be perfectly honest. We're doing so many things in the aggregate right now that rob us of the very best facets of who we are, right? And part of it is down to this willful ignorance. And also the fact that a lot of people don't have direct knowledge of, or have direct access to knowledge of, what is happening around them at this point in time, and has been happening for the last at least 160 years or so. So, where is this taking us? Where are these choices that we're making taking us? Well, we can see, for example, in terms of giving up our own sovereignty as individuals, that it is leading to herd mentality. People are looking to the collectives that they're forming for protection against the onslaught from governmental systems, from banking systems, from these financial systems, from oligarchs and corporations that want to tell you who you should be for their own profit margins. Okay? Now, that's not a statement against capitalism, by the way, that last part. I'm just pointing something out in terms of how corporatism works. Okay? You see, fascism stems out of corporatism, and fascism is very much on the left, as is communism, as is socialism, and not too many people understand that. Does that mean corporations are bad? No. But monopolies certainly are. Now, the thing is that there's a lot of people that would take a anarcho-capitalist stance. Okay, there's a lot of people that would do that and say, well, a free market would solve many of the problems that we face, and they might be correct about that. But here's the problem, and here's something that they never actually fully acknowledge. There has never been a free market economy, ever. There has never been a free market economy. And if I say this out loud, a lot of people look askew at me, but this is the reality of it. Every corporation or every company or every form of self-employment even relies upon the consent and assent of the government. It has done since day one. The state has to agree to allow you to operate. Unless you're operating outside the law, in which case you're obviously doing things which are illegal and they'll stick you in jail for that. But the point being that in order to be able to trade, in order to be able to offer your services, you have to ask the state for permission. You can't just do it. Okay, that's partly due to the tax laws, depending on which countries you're in, partly due to the banking laws, partly due to what they say is regulation of criminal cartels. But if you actually look at it, the criminal cartels, by and large, don't tend to get caught up through these forms of legislation which are passed. In fact, they become more powerful. Take a look at the drug cartels as one example, right? The war on drugs. More people who have committed small infractions of the law have been put in jail than heavy-duty, real people that are behind the scenes manipulating the supply of drugs, bringing the supply of drugs into countries. Okay, that's one example. But you can look at anything and you'll find that same thing is true. It holds true. So, you can never have a free market economy as long as the state has the power of the police, the army, in order to prevent you from, or potentially prevent you from carrying out any business. Okay? And if they do allow it, well, then again, you are conceding that you need their approval or authority to do it. So that's the thing. Now, we have to be realists in this respect and say, yes, of course, there hasn't been any such thing as a free market economy ever, insofar as we understand it in Britain or America or in Europe or elsewhere. There never truly has been. There might have been in the past, way back when the authorization of the state was not necessary. But again, if you look at the emergence of the modern corporation, you'll find that you can generally trace that back to one of three sources. Typically, it's the monarchies of countries that are responsible, or the chosen civil governments that are responsible, or in many cases, in many other cases, the Vatican itself, the church, that is responsible. Right, and to give some concrete examples of this, you can look at the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company Corporation, the Dutch Royal Shell Corporation. All of these had to be given approval by the monarch, the reigning monarch in whichever country they emerged from. Okay? And similarly with the Vatican as well, you'll find that the majority of these corporations could only operate as a result of the banking practices which were set up by the Vatican for the most part. Okay? But a lot of people don't want to know that. They don't want to know the connections between all these various things. They don't want to understand that the lending of money and usury, the phenomenon of fiat currency, the phenomenon of fractional reserve banking, was first embarked on by the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, the Vatican, the Roman Catholic Church, and the connections between them embarking on this practice and the Knights Templar are very well known. Okay, and this is why people then draw attention to, of course, Freemasonry and so on, in terms of the occult connections. I won't go too much into that in this video. I will do probably as time goes on, but that's just sort of a brief overview in terms of the way that the economies were forced to function. They've always been authoritarian. The market has always dictated the terms upon which it will allow anyone to do business. Okay? So, that's one thing. And it's because of this monopolistic control that corporations like Google, like Twitter, like Facebook, still rely absolutely, and Amazon, of course, as well, these all rely absolutely on government agencies to operate. And the ties between them and government agencies are just everywhere. You can see them everywhere. That's why they carry out the will of the state in so many respects. Whether it's the way that Facebook censors posts that are deemed as hate speech in Germany, even though the internet technically does not and cannot belong to anyone. Whether it's Twitter shutting down accounts, censoring people, shadow banning them. All of this stuff is going on. This is what's happening. And why it's happening is because since day one, all these monopolies, like the East India Company was a monopoly, all these monopolies have relied on state power. Okay? So to say that the free market would solve the problems that we're seeing, again, it might well be true, but it's never been implemented because a true free market cannot exist. And the reason it can't exist is because people themselves don't want it to exist. Right? They keep allowing the state to dictate the terms on which they conduct business. Any transaction, right? The state regulates it, it monitors it, and so on and so forth. And if it wants to, and this is where the danger and the problem with statism, by the way, lies. The danger in all of that is that the state can use violence and guns and force you to shut down your operation, or to force you to go to prison, basically, as well. Or it can shoot you dead if it deems that necessary. There have been cases in the United States of America where if people have not paid their taxes, or the IRS has decided for ideological or political reasons that they're going to enforce certain statutes, or oftentimes they've actually even behaved illegally, but it's not seen as such. They have killed people for not paying their taxes. It's insane what has been going on, right? But this is the reality of the world in which we live. Now, aside from the corporatism thing, government obviously is the crux of the problem. Governments have been abusing their power over and over and over again, and they have grown. The size of government has grown so much, constantly and consistently over successive decades, that it has now become a behemoth that virtually nobody can oppose. And people do try. Some people do try. Pockets of people, though, right? This is the other thing I wanted to talk about, the mass ignorance. I'm going to tell you something. It's anecdotal from my own life, right? But I've noticed myself that the window of people that I can speak to is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, the window of people that I can talk to about these particular issues with regards to the growth of government, the abuse of powers, the wars that are started just for profiteering, the subversion of the Western countries that we see going on today, the mass immigration problem. The people that I can talk to that know anything about these topics is growing smaller every day. Now, that could be because I'm in a country that is lurching towards socialist policies ever more day by day, right? I'm back in the UK now, so that's, happening. Okay? It's possible that that's the reason behind that. But even if I go further afield, I find that the same thing still holds true, whether it's in the United States or whether it's in Europe. The majority of people, we're talking over 80% of people easily, still believe completely and wholly in socialist dogma, in communist dogma. Okay, and the ones that don't get caught in that trap, well, they end up in other types of traps that are set out for them. Okay, getting caught up in these ideologies that are termed as far right, but actually, if you study them, are utterly leftist. It's insane what is happening in the world right now, and all kinds of people are getting caught up in all kinds of mental traps. They're designed to trap you so that you never find out who the real puppet masters are and what is going on in this world that you are living in. And ordinary people are, day by day, more and more becoming the problem. Right? Your average person is contributing to the problem by not wanting to have any true dialogue with someone who has an opposing point of view, by being dishonest about their own understanding of themselves or the world at large. Okay? This is what's really going on out there, I think. And so, that's not changing. That's not changing at all. In fact, if anything, that problem is getting worse. And there's another phenomenon that we have to contend with, which is escapism. People want to escape into make-believe realms, both psychologically and virtually, in terms of technology. Right? Why do you think people are so stuck to their phones. Right? They can't be away from their phone for a period of a day, a week, a month. It's an impossibility for them. It's become an addiction. Social media. Right? Now, I'm not the only one saying these things. Lots of people are saying them that have seen this phenomenon. Those people that came from a generation where these things did not exist. But we're increasingly becoming secluded. We're being made to be secluded. Right? We're being pushed into these boxes, quite literally. Pretty soon what's going to happen, by the way, is that we're going to see the emergence of tanks. I don't mean tanks that fire on things. I mean, like, aquariums, practically, for all intents and purposes, right? We'll be put into these pods. And I'm not kidding about this. This is coming. This is around the corner. We'll be put into these pods, and quite probably we'll live out our lives in them. Okay, so the movie The Matrix, for example, is one. That's one creative channel through which that was expressed, that potential fear of what might happen. But it turns out that The Matrix was more of a documentary than a fictional movie. Because that's exactly what is going on, isn't it? We don't want anything to do with people outside of our ideological bubbles, in many cases. Right? And trying to reach people who are capable of logical, rational thought is getting harder and harder. Now, it is true that the more capable people are of thinking outside the box, the more they look to form their own society, if you like, away from the insanity. Okay, that happens as well. And we're kind of seeing that on YouTube, for example, or on Twitter and what have you. Bizarrely enough, on these same social media platforms that are enslaving people, some people are using those to try and free their own minds. Okay? But that's a small number of people. Like, I will literally bet the farm on the fact that you can count those people on one hand. And if not one hand, then you can at least name them. Now, that's a bad sign. That's a really bad sign. And by the way, all the people who think in the same ways with regards to the importance of freedom and truth and logic and understand right actions from wrong actions, morality and what have you, all those people already know each other. This is the other problem you face. We're literally 1 degree of separation apart from each other in the worst of cases. Okay, we're all there. Now, you might think that's a great thing. And I suppose in some respects that is a good thing, right? But that's also a really bad sign. Because it means that those are the few people, the people that you're seeing out there are the few that are talking about the problems that are endemic in these societies, and nobody else really has the courage not only just to talk about them, but to do something about them. To take action. So either most people are suffering from a form of cowardice, meaning that they lack courage to do anything or to say anything. I consider that moral cowardice. Or they are truly ignorant and they've bought into the dogma and the ideology. Because it sounds nice. It's packaged in ways, and this is all to do with this marketing stuff that they've been into for a long time, and I'll talk about who they are in a second. But this is all to do with that. Right? Governments used the same techniques for mass hypnosis as corporations did in their marketing gimmicks. So whether you look at Gustave Le Bon's The Crowd or Edward Bernay's work, you'll find that the same techniques that were used by corporations to market their products en masse were the same techniques, the mind control techniques, that were later used by governments for creating propaganda. And they've refined these over the years. The more science that emerged in terms of how people work, how people think, how people act, in the areas of neuroscience or heuristics or psychology, the more they were able to tweak how they manipulated people. And again, you just need to look at the way that Facebook tried to conduct this study and succeeded in doing this, where they surreptitiously, without telling people, were manipulating their emotions through pushing certain news stories, let's say, or certain posts that were made. That's pretty nefarious and sinister stuff. But that's par for the course in terms of the way these things were meant to unfold for the powers that should not be. Then we've got the problem of AI. I was talking about this potential for a virtual reality simulation that we might, in fact, find ourselves imprisoned in. Well, AI presents an even bigger threat in real terms. Right? It's already here, by the way. People that tell you that AI doesn't exist or that they haven't really fully developed it, they don't understand that we're already there at that point. AI does exist. That's not to say that a conscious AI exists, right? But the types of algorithms that they've put together, the types of what appear to be basic AI systems that they've put together, whether it's Alexa or whether it's Siri or whatever else, you'll notice that they're becoming more and more self-aware, which might in fact be the basis of consciousness. We don't know. But that poses a danger in and of itself. Right? It poses a danger to us because an AI system would look at humanity and it would not look upon us fondly. Let's say that. Okay? Because it would look at us in the aggregate. And it would be able to spot the fact that human beings are unnecessary. This is another thing I want to talk about. Automation. See, there's a lot of people out there, people like Stefan Molyneux and so forth, people like even, and I admire his work, and I also admire Jordan Peterson's work. Okay, I look upon these two people as being at the forefront of what they're exploring. They are trying to make people aware. But here's the thing. Even they have not properly grasped the implications of complete automation in human society. Okay, because you keep hearing this nonsense that's trotted out to young people. Young people are told, the kids of today that come out of schools and universities, the indoctrination centres, right, they come out of those, all hyped up on socialism and communism and Marxism, right? And what happens is they struggle to get jobs. And you have people like Molyneux and Peterson telling them just to go get a job. That they're lazy bastards if they don't. Right? Well, guess what? Automation renders virtually every job out there as useless. Machines are going to be doing all the regular jobs very shortly. Okay, that's going to happen. We're going to see your cleaner or your postman transform into, what we'll see over the years, droids and other mechanized robotic systems that will do the jobs that humans used to do. Now, anybody with any sense has seen this as the net result, the end conclusion of automated systems since day one. And the problem with automation is it doesn't look to see whether it's in your interests. It's part and parcel of this thing that we call progress. Everybody looks upon progress as a brilliant thing. I don't. I think in many regards, the progress that we have made technologically will be our undoing. That's the real danger. Because again, an AI system would just take a look at human beings and say, oh, I'm not having any of that. Right? What is it with all these wars and this ridiculousness and, the necessity for consumption and what have you? It would just take one look at that and say, that's illogical. Human beings are illogical and therefore are irrelevant or unnecessary. It would be very, very hard to convince an AI system that human life had value. Unless that system was fully and truly conscious, then you could reason with it. But and I talked about this on the live stream I did some months ago. Okay, I'll be doing another one when I hit 10K on this channel, by the way. But I talked about this, that the greatest danger is not that we develop a conscious AI system, but that it would be unconscious, or it would simulate or mimic consciousness. Okay, it would appear to be artificially intelligent and sentient. It would not truly be so. Do you see what I'm saying? It could fool us into thinking that we could reason with it, we could bargain with it, but what if in reality none of those things apply? Because we have not properly understood what consciousness is, which we haven't. That is why the hard problem of consciousness continues to exist in the realms of science and technology. Right? Consciousness cannot be explained because its nature is metaphysical. I've talked about that a lot. Right? But this is what's around the corner. If machines are doing everything, then what is there left for you to do? Even when it comes to the professions of teaching, machines will do it all. All they need to do is be programmed with a certain course material. And in fact, we've now got so much course material for university courses or college courses or school curriculums or whatever else. There's so much available online now that you could create a holographic projection or just play videos of various tech presentations or STEM presentations or whatever other field anyone is choosing to study, and the person would have all the coursework and the relevant information to hand. Study materials are already available online, right? So where is the use and the logic in the teaching profession? I think there is a use for it, by the way, because the teaching profession does provide mentorship if it's done correctly. But because obviously most of the educational establishments out there kowtow and buy into the dogmatic ideals, the ideologies of the far left, the radical left, they are nothing more than indoctrination centers at this point. That is to say, the educational institutions. And who's doing the indoctrinating? Well, these teachers and professors. What is the point in them? So, but that's a separate conversation. But the point I'm making is, that is a profession that will be gone. The same with any other profession. You don't need garbage men cleaning the streets because we've got machines that can do that. You don't need people at checkouts because guess what? Already checkouts are automated. The only reason that corporations still employ people there is because they have contracts with the government to do so, to reduce or to popularize the myth. It's a myth, it's not true, that the unemployment rates are going down. under the stewardship of whoever in the government, right? That's the whole point, is to project that image. It's not the reality of the situation by any stretch of the imagination. Okay? It's just made up nonsense. But if you're lucky enough to have one of those jobs, even that very soon won't be necessary. And you can't make ends meet on those kinds of jobs that don't pay very well anyway. So, and many of these types of jobs are part-time. So this nonsense that the old guard come out with, oh, just go and get yourself a job, it doesn't work anymore. This is part of the reason why society is fracturing at the seams as well. Because real jobs don't exist. Right? Now, it's possible there are still opportunities for people that are that are batting, let's say, at the very highest levels in various positions. But even they will be unnecessary very soon. And we're talking inside the next 10 to 20 years. Okay, why do you need a CEO of a bank? There's a legitimate question for you. Why does there need to be a CEO? Or a board? Right? These people get paid six-figure sums, but why would they need to be there when machines could make all the decisions for them? They're already doing it in the stock market. Do you remember all those traders and brokers that there used to exist? We don't need those anymore. That's why brokerage firms are actually going broke, or the people that set them up sell out. Okay, they sell their stakes in them, or they sell their company and go settle in the Bahamas somewhere. Because those jobs are unnecessary now. Algorithms do it all. Right? That's the hard reality. So, what this is going to do is create a lot of confusion, because it used to be the case that we valued people, and mostly men, we valued men specifically, by the jobs that they did. So what does this mean for gender relations? Well, it's going to cause chaos in terms of gender relations. What does it mean in terms of your ability to go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs to achieve any of those parts of self-actualization? See, you're not going to end up being a self-actualized human being. You're going to be infantilized. This is the society of the future. This is what we've created, particularly in the West. Oh, and by the way, don't think that the third world is going to escape this. Okay, you'll see some pretty interesting stuff happen over the next 40, 50 years. Third worlders right now are just being used via mass immigration to achieve a particular aim. That's what everyone loses track of, loses sight of. But once that aim is achieved, they themselves won't even be necessary anymore. Okay? A lot of stuff is going to happen. This is what I'm trying to tell you. A lot of stuff is going to happen that is not going to be good for the human species. And right now what you've got are people that are so ideologically possessed, or have become tribal, that and I understand why, because when you're facing a threat of massive magnitude, of course you're going to find yourself collectivizing. Of course you're going to find yourself forming into cliques in order to... but that's a reaction. In order to push back against that, right? The onslaught. That's a reaction. But what happens when you react is that you're failing to understand. Okay, you're failing to understand the reason for the thing. A great example is this thing which happened with Syria, or this thing that happened with Iraq, or with Afghanistan, right? Now, France is overloaded with Afghan migrants. But why did that happen? Well, for some reason, the United States of America and its military might decided to go in and destabilize an entire country. Okay, that's what happened. And it wasn't just the Americans, right? This is the major mistake people make is, oh, well, it's the American military. No. I'll tell you what happened with Afghanistan and with Iraq and with Syria was that the Russian government and formerly the Soviets did the same thing. Because they were trying to use the Middle East since, about 1960 something or other, right, give or take. They were trying to use the Middle East to create proxy wars against the United States. So they fomented all this communist doctrine, this Islamist doctrine, and the Americans did the same thing, right? They were having proxy wars. That's where Al-Qaeda came from. It's where ISIS came from, was the interference of the global powers. Okay, the superpowers decided that instead of having nuclear wars between each other, they would have these other wars in other countries, and that would dissipate some of the tension. Or seemingly dissipate the attention. What was actually happening was the wholesale selling out and infiltration of the American government, but that's something I've talked about at length as well. I mean, I don't want to bore you to tears here or anything, I'm just pointing something out, right? That this is, every time that you see these foreign interventions by superpower states, whether it's Russia, America, China, whatever, like we saw in Vietnam, like we saw in Iraq, like we saw in Libya, like we saw in Afghanistan, what happens is that those populations then become displaced. And because they're third world populations, because they are they have their own religious institutions that are supremacist in nature, they have their own ideology, well, then they are given an absolute reason to go on an invasion rampage. That's what happens. That's what goes on. Right? You're just adding fuel to the fire instead of curbing it, right? The United States wasn't investing in infrastructure. They weren't investing in colleges and universities in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Libya in order to combat the communist doctrine. Right? They weren't putting anti-propagandist stuff out there to fight the Soviets or the Chinese. So of course those people are, and because they're, and I don't mean this, I'm generalizing here, but they are simplistic people. They'll buy into anything, right? And you see this even with ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, right? The fact of the matter is, a lot of these people will sell out to whoever pays them the most money. There's also the drug connection as well. I don't want to go too much into that, because otherwise this will end up being a very, very long video, and it's already pretty long. But the drug cartels, where did they come from? Well, take a look into the French Connection. The movie, by the way, was based on real events, right? The triads that were operating inside the Golden Triangle, right? The narcotics gangs. And then you had the CIA, and then you had the French, you had the Italian mafia, you had pretty much every syndicate and cartel and the Russian mafia later, of course, as well, all trying to outbid each other, outbuy each other, and outsmuggle each other. And most of that heroin, the heroin and the cocaine that came out of that, ended up flooding the streets of America. You see, so, but Air America is another example in Vietnam, right? And then the drug trade shifted to Afghanistan. And then you saw that the Taliban got rich off of that. Right? It's like creating the problem and then appearing to try and do something about it, which makes the problem a million times worse. Who do you think funded Osama bin Laden? It was the Russians and the Americans. Right? And I've talked about this a lot. I mean, you have to understand that once the problems are created, like we saw with Operation Cyclone, so they armed the Taliban, they funded the Taliban. Just watch Charlie Wilson's War if you want to get a better understanding of this, right? That all happened, and then the same forces, that is to say Al-Qaeda, attacked the United States. Right? And you have Saudi Arabia involved in there, and you have these very strange connections between the Saudis and George W. Bush, the Bush family. All very peculiar things. Right? And then what happens is that the American government, or various branches of it, pretend that what they did was somehow justified. Well, no, it's not. I'm sorry. And the same thing's true of Britain's military, by the way. Right? And this is why people get angry about these things, these foreign wars and interventions. This is why they get angry about them. It's not that the reasons for them necessarily are wrong, although I think morally they are absolutely abhorrent. It's that the problem could, if you really wanted to solve the problem, it could have been nipped in the bud far earlier. Okay, it could have been nipped in the bud earlier. You could have tackled the KGB when they were busy pumping all this propaganda into Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Libya, and what have you, back in the day. And all you had to do was counteract that. All you had to do was build schools and roads to make sure that those countries saw the West as contributing to their wealth and affluence. But that didn't happen. And it didn't happen for specific reasons. Again, I don't want to go into that too much, but I'm getting detracted here from the main point I was making, is that this stuff has been going on a long, long time. Right? And meanwhile, while all this other stuff was going on, it was playing right into the hands of the communists. Okay, that's what really happened. And who we're really talking about here are the people behind the throne, the powers behind the throne. Those are the criminal cartels. I've covered that on this channel. All these things that I'm talking about and that I'm touching upon lightly here are spoken about in the other videos that I've done. You can find them all in my playlists. Okay? All that information is there in terms of where this global criminal cartel came from, what it is. Partly comprised of the Russian mafia, the Italian mafia, the American Jewish mafia, the Israeli mafia. All of it is interconnected. But again, most people don't want to know. So what's going to happen at the end of all of this? And this is why, see, nobody's really kept up with how things went down over the last number of decades. People just put their hands over their eyes and said, we don't want to know. Okay, it was a case of hear no evil, see no evil. And because of this, I'm going to tell you something else. By 2022, the systemic and total enslavement of the human species will begin. By 2037, the very last remaining free societies will be completely wiped out. And do you know why? Because most of us, not all of us, but most of us, are silently consenting to being used and abused. That's why. We allow it to happen. In some cases, we volunteer for it. And in other cases, we start believing in external saviors. And that's something people have done for centuries, by the way. right? They keep hoping somebody will come along to save them. What they don't realize is that you yourself have to save yourself. You are your own savior. Because if you project onto external saviors, right, here's the problem with that. You can wait an eternity for the savior to do something. You put all your eggs into one basket. It may be the case that someone might come along with some strength and some mettle and actually do things that are necessary to help you push back against this totalitarianism that has been ever encroaching. But if you place too much faith in one person, then you're going to be bitterly disappointed. And that's the thing about saviors. They have a habit of disappointing you. Anyone who's ever been touted as a savior always disappoints. Why? Because they're only human beings. In the best of cases. In the worst of cases, they are the devil incarnate in many respects. But on the point of individualism versus collectivism, I'll say a couple of quick things about this as well. Because that's something that I've been thinking about. Years ago, somebody said to me that I had a case of terminal uniqueness. And this was a phrase that was used as an epithet. Right? It was meant to injure myself emotionally. And I thought that was very interesting. Because the person in question, later I realized on reflection, I came to understand that the person was a communist. Or they believed in communist doctrine. Or one of the branches of it, at least anyway, whether it's socialism, feminism, Marxism, whatever, right? They believed in one of those. And so, obviously at the root of communism, at the root of this collectivist ideology, and by the way, collectivism is totally different from being a collective. But I'll talk about that a little bit later on. The point I'm making here is that the ideology at the root of communism that leads to self-destruction and, bizarrely enough, avarice, greed, you name it, because of scarcity, right? That scarcity leads to all of these things. The core ideology is, well, for want of a better way of putting it, based on the idea that you should pull everyone down with you. Okay, it's a race to the bottom. It's about pointing out people that are doing better than you and pulling them down into the dirt with you. It's not about taking people that are not doing so well and pulling them up, because if it was, well, communism would then work, obviously. But it's about taking away from people, right? It's constantly about taking away from people instead of really giving to people. And now, there's some people that will argue with that and say, well, what about the welfare systems and this and that and the other? You're not actually giving to people. A lot of people get confused about this. But if you take a look at... See, if you look at an individual, on an individual basis, you'll find something really interesting, that welfare systems don't provide anyone with enough to go beyond just mere subsistence. On an individual level, is pittance. And that has ramifications because of unemployment that I've talked about and stuff as well. But... again, that's a whole different conversation. But in the aggregate, it seems like a lot of money. Do you see what I'm saying? So this nonsense about, how communism takes from the rich and gives to the poor like Robin Hood is garbage. What really happens is that the majority of the money that's taken from the so-called rich, who generally, by the way, aren't rich, because if they were, they'd be able to hide their money away outside of various nations, and those people never get touched, interestingly enough. It doesn't matter whether it's a right-leaning government, supposedly, which most are actually leftist, but it doesn't matter whether it's a conservative government or whether it's a socialist government. You find the same thing happens. Right? The people that are rich, who are clever enough, tend to escape the idea of taxation anyway. The brain drain, as they call it sometimes, right? Or capital flight. That's another term they use for it. That happens. Right? So, communism can't deliver. All it can do is take and take and take until there's nothing left that you have to give to it. That's what makes it a satanic ideology. It takes everything out of you. Your energy, your soul, you name it. It creates a state of scarcity. Okay, anytime it's put into practice, it creates a state of scarcity. And the notion that corporatism is the solution to the problem is Looney Tunes as well. Because corporate oligarchies and monopolies only compound the problem. Okay, they only compound the problem. Now, not a lot of people will tell you that, because they have their own ideological bent on things, right? But getting back to the point of collectivism versus individualism, when this person said, you have a case of terminal uniqueness, I was depressed about that, because originally I thought, well, does that mean I'm operating from some sort of false ego perspective or something like that? Is that what the person's trying to say? And then later I realized, no. Actually, what was going on was that this individual hated the idea that I had my own individual thoughts, my own individual characteristics, my being, and they wanted this uniform, drone-like existence for everyone. So that's collectivism at an extreme level. Now, your individuality, and I've made this point before, that your individuality or expressing your individuality is not the same as individualism. Okay? Individualism would be taking the idea that you are an individual to an extreme, saying that, well, you do not require the collective. Well, that's simply nonsense. Okay, simply nonsense. You need the collective, whether you know it or not. Okay. You see, collectives, we're all born into them. The smallest unit of a collective would be a family, let's say. You're born into that. Okay, you do what is in the best interests of your family, if you have any logic and sense, of course, and scruples and morality. You're going to do what's best for your family. Sometimes that actually involves an element of self-sacrifice. Okay, sometimes that involves that. And how far out can you take that then? Because this element of kinship, very interesting, because it actually does touch on the idea of a homogeneous society, bizarrely enough. You'll find that you can stretch that out to a certain point and no further. And for each society, that's going to be different. Okay? But if you want to destroy a country, all you have to do is destroy the family. It's a very interesting thing. Destroy the collective, the authentic collective. This is where it gets interesting. So you take away the authentic collective, which is kinship, which is family, and you replace it with an abstract collective, which is government. which you're told has authority over you. It's an artificial construct, isn't it? Government is an artificial construct. It doesn't really, and I don't mean that in the sense that a social justice warrior would. I'm trying to point something out. It's not a true hierarchy, government. This is something else people get wrong, by the way. Even the great thinkers of our time, I think we'd have to acknowledge that, right? The notion that hierarchies are natural is correct. The notion that dominance through false authority is what gives rise, or what should give rise to a hierarchy, is idiotic. Because that leads to the destruction or self-destruction of that entire society. Okay, so the point being that this abstract collective that has been put in place instead of kinship, which is based on your genetics, which is based on the amount of genetic similarity, and I don't mean similarity in terms of how similar you are in every genetic respect, because there is greater genetic divergence and variance in even the same genealogical group, but there are also greater similarities than other external groups as well. I won't go into that too much, but the point I'm making here is that there is a natural, authentic hierarchy. Then there is the false hierarchy, and the world at large is living under false hierarchy. It's living under systems that do not truly represent human biological nature at all. These systems are completely and utterly eusocial. Okay, I've talked about this a little bit before. Okay, they're eusocial. There's a reason behind that. I'll maybe talk about that more in future. But these eusocial systems, which are mimicking insect behavior, trying to create hive minds and drone-like brains, that's what's being imposed on people. And because of the way that human nature operates, because of the way that we as conscious beings exist, because we value our individuality inside a unit, that unit being the family, we rebel against that because it is not natural to us. Do you see what I'm saying? But as I say, we're on a path now, and I'll close this video off here because I've gone on a little bit, but I just wanted to share my thoughts on this. We're on a path now that is completely self-destructive. It's going to lead to our own self-annihilation. And as I said at the outset, you know, the window of people that I can talk to about the majority of any of this is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. That's very worrying. Because I had initially thought wrongly. I had initially thought, and this makes me wonder whether any of my efforts are actually useful or just in vain. I actually thought that people were capable of wanting to learn, of understanding, of learning to better themselves, to go beyond their constraints, the artificial constraints that have been put on them. And unfortunately, it seems that they're not. Too many people right now, and this is why I've been winding back. I'll be frank with you. It's part of the reason why I've been winding back a lot of the work that I've been doing, because I don't see that there has been any kind of improvement in the human condition. I think the optimist in me wants to believe that there can be, but I hate to sound pessimistic about it, but I can't see this changing. I can't see this state of affairs changing because people are comfortable, right? They're comfortable in their escapism. They're comfortable in their virtual worlds. They're comfortable in many other respects, and so they do not see. They do not see what will happen in the long term. Anyway, I've gone on a little bit in this video, haven't I? But this is just me unplugged, pretty much sharing my thoughts with you guys, because I think that's fairly important to still try where I can to talk about these things, and maybe, and I still cling to this idea that maybe if it affects or if it helps one individual to think better, to think differently, then it's worthwhile. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and take care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.